Hello and welcome to Corney and Barrow Burgundy Unpicked podcast series. I'm joined today on a wonderful day. We've got three of my colleagues here. One of them is his 30th birthday, and that's Neville. Good morning, Neville.
Good morning.
Um,
Feeling young.
I've got Guy,
Good morning. It's not my 30th birthday. Wish it was.
and also joining the quartet as our last podcast, we've got Mr. Aaran Eccles.
All downhill from here, Neville.
Yeah, it really is. Really is.
I'm not sure, 30. The decade of 30s is a good one. It's quite a big partying decade. I worry about you.
Yeah. I need to look after myself.
I'm sure you will. And lastly, myself, Joe Muller. So hello, and this is a podcast which we are focusing on our Burgundy 2023 main offer. So as many of you will know, and actually a good chunk of people, a good sort of 250 plus people will be turning up on Tuesday next week to our Burgundy 23 en primeur tasting at Carpenter's Hall. In advance of that, we thought we'd get a recording, which we're going to sort of release alongside the offer, just to discuss the wines that are there, not all of them, because out of the sort of 36 Burgundy domains we work with, we have 20 being shown at the tasting. So if you're there and you're listening after it, I hope you had a good tasting. But we'll give some insight into what we liked about some of the domains that we're showing at that tasting. As you'll probably know, we're not going to jump into too much on the vintage. We did a specific podcast previously on the Burgundy on 23 as a year and the quality of it and its different sort of facets. So this one's more about those domains that are going to be in that offer. We were all there at various points across time in October and November. So yeah, look, why don't we start with some of the highlights. So Guy, maybe start with you. Is there some of the domains that we'll be showing there that really leapt out and you enjoyed tasting when you were out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe. Just to kick off to say I've got a bit of a croaky voice this morning, so if I sound a bit strange, please bear with me. We tasted 36 domains in total over the course of 2 months, so it was quite an odyssey. And picking out two is a bit of a challenge, I suppose. But I thought I would go for two of the newer names in our portfolio. The first I was going to mention is Domaine du Couvent. Now, it's new in a sense, but it used to be known as Domaine de Varois, which was based in Gevrey-Chambertin. Domaine du Couvent is now located under the very centre of Nuit-Saint-Georges. So we taste in these very, very lovely historic cellars under the centre of the town. It's a father and son team, Philippe and Paul Chéron. Paul is going to be with us at our Burgundy tasting next week. They took over in the year 2000, although they had been involved for decades before that. But they took over sole ownership from Gilbert Hamel, who was the previous owner of Domaine de Varois, or co-owner. So all of these historic vineyards, which really are centred on the Côte de Nuit, have been brought together under the Domaine du Couvent banner. It's an estate that goes back to the 1930s, and it was established by Philippe's grandfather. And then they brought together over the years different patchworks of vines. I wanted to mention two wines in particular that stood out for me, both from Gevrey-Chambertin. On the village side of things, there's a wine called Clos des Mets des Ouches, which was under the under the Domaine de Varois banner, and has now been brought under Domaine du Couvent. And for me, that was a wonderful wine that really stood out and has a lot of Gevrey personality. I think that's a bargain price-wise. So do look out for it at our tasting next week. And I think it's something that really demonstrates, got about 40% whole bunch fermentation, so it's got a bit of that spicy side of Gevrey, but it's got great aging potential, and I think that's a good one to have in the cellar. And then going up to the Grand Cru level, I wanted to mention their Charme Chambertin, which essentially is the top wine of the domaine. But again, this is an old friend of CMB. It's a wine that did used to appear under the Domaine de Varois manifestation, and it's something which I think is a very special wine. It comes from the upper part of Mazoyer-Chambertin, but is labelled as a Charme. And those are two wines from that stable which I think are well worth looking out for.
Are there any sort of real changes in the domain since it sort of became anew?
Yeah, it's a good question, Aaron. I mean, I think in general terms, they've gone towards elegance and sort of a hands-off approach in terms of winemaking, which is obviously what we really like here at CMB. So I think that's a good thing to see, a bit more of this perfume and prettiness coming out of the wines.
So yeah, I think Paul chatted to us a little bit when we were in the cellar, and what was really cool to see, what him talking about was that, when they're thinking about the kind of what they do with the kind of oak regime and the sort of whole bunch stuff, because too much oak can make things a little bit OTT, and too much whole bunch can make things a little bit OTT. And he was basically talking loads about like some of the vineyards, where there's the more like kind of limestone driven vineyards in the Domaine holdings, that's where they kind of hold back a little bit more. They kind of dial back the whole bunch, dial back the oaks. They really want to see that like kind of limestone transparency. And I think it's little tweaks like that when you sort of see a young, exciting winemaker like Paul kind of at the helm, where you're like, this guy's switched on.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Liking what he's doing.
I think we're at that stage in Burgundy where you're seeing this generation come through. And I mean, people who've travelled, who've been elsewhere making wines, maybe, obviously we can get through in French, but I mean, a lot of this new generation are totally conversant in English, and, that sort of puts a different spin on things sometimes. And I think Paul is a very good example of that. And I think, yeah, go on, Joe.
Yeah, because I mean, he does. When we had dinner the Burgundy tasting last year, we were sat with Paul Archie on our table, and he's obviously done winemaking elsewhere, and I think those sort of examples of like Southern Hemisphere, wherever it is, they are more happy to talk about them, more open minded, and so they bring in sort of a little bit of more gregarious nature in winemaking, if you like, than the sort of the strict traditional Burgundian way, and that's quite a nice, refreshing.
Paul's done a bit of travel, hasn't he? Paul's travelled round and kind of seen things on the other side of various bits of the world, and I think bringing that back to the kind of the heartland of Burgundy. It's a fresh perspective. Great wines.
Yeah, so Domaine du Couvent, a name to look out for next week at the tasting.
Tasting. I missed that.
Yeah, so very, very, very much recommended. And that probably leads us on the theme of the sort of younger generation coming through to the second domain I was going to mention, which is Domaine du Puy de l'Ors, which is an exclusivity that we launched last year. In the 22 vintage. 22 was actually their second ever vintage. They started in 21, which was quite a baptism of fire, I think. They only made 5,000 bottles in their first year because it was such a small frost-affected vintage. They have 7.5 hectares of vines in Savigny, and it's a couple behind it, Juliette and Jean. They've taken their respective surnames and sort of fused them together to make the name of the domaine, which is Puy de l'Ors. So look out for them.
Very Brangelina.
Yes, absolutely. Very on point, exactly. They established the domain very, very recently, as I say, and 2023, which we're going to be releasing shortly, is our second vintage and only their third vintage. They make 3 reds, 3 whites, mostly from Savigny. 2 wines I just wanted to mention. First of all, a white, which they've rather sort of self-deprecatingly called l'absurde, the absurd, which is a Blanc de Noir, and it's 100% Pinot Noir, but it's a white wine. So they do a sort of free run, effectively, Pinot Noir, which is it looks exactly like a Chardonnay or an Aligoté would look. It's a white wine to all intents and purposes, but it's got a little bit of bite, it's got a little bit of texture, and it's something different, and a wine which for me really stands out.
Yeah, so I'm very, very excited to try the 23s, because as you've already mentioned, we launched them last year, 22s. I did a little lunch with them both at Cubey in London, a great omakase sushi restaurant. And we partnered some great food with it. And the l'absurde particularly was one that jumped out to go brilliantly with food, because that sort of textural and that sort of acid kick from the Blanc de Noir, and in terms of it really it cut through the sort of the fatty tuna and the sort of the soy umami flavors. It was brilliant. So,
yeah.
I think what's really, really cool about what they're doing as well is that, there's only, 6 wines total?
Yeah.
They're sort of all based in Savigny, and like, whenever you sort of sit with Jean and Juliette, you get the sense that like each one of these little plots is like properly their baby.
Yeah.
They're, they speak about all of the kind of climat that they look after with such sort of fondness, because it's not a huge domain, and they sort of seem to, they've got this understanding and sort of focus on each of their little plots that really shows in the quality of the wine.
I think it's a nice microcosm of Burgundy in the sense that it's an example of family vines that were rented out in fermage for a couple of generations, and they've basically taken back. They both had very successful careers in Paris, and I think probably weren't looking to take over quite as early as they did. But the agreements, the lease agreements, came to an end. And I think it was a sort of specific snapshot in time. They realized that it was now or never in terms of taking over. So they made the very brave decision to sort of leave behind some very different lifestyles in Paris and come back to Burgundy and start making wine there. And what is interesting is that they're doing it as a domaine rather than as a négociant. We've seen a phenomenon of kind of micro négociants making wines, and in some cases making wines at necessarily very high prices. And that is not the case for these guys. They're making very high quality wines, but at really very reasonable prices. I mean, the reds are anywhere between 225 per six to 265 per six for last year's 22 vintage. So I mean, it's very accessible price points.
I think it'll be really interesting to see at the tasting as well. I think that the spittoons next to their tables will be the least full. I think that they are wines that you just love to drink. And even though they are young vintages, and we obviously encourage everyone to spit tasting samples, they're just so delicious that you want to get stuck into them straight away. Of course, they will age, but these are Burgundies that you just want to drink. They're sort of really fruit forward. They're aromatic, just great wines.
Yeah.
When they smell that good and they taste that good, you do sit there and you go, "What? Why wait?"
Yeah.
I quite like the three reds also. They play with different variations of whole bunch fermentation. So they have one that's totally destemmed, which is Clos de Godot. Then they have a second wine, Les Follettes, which is 50% whole bunch fermentation. And then they have Lavière, which is their Premier Cru Savigny, which is 100% whole bunch. So, a bit of a geeky thing maybe, but it's quite interesting to see those different gradations of whole bunch spices.
So I feel slightly reluctant to sort of over-recommend Les Follettes because I'm hoping possibly at the end of the campaign there might be a case for me.
I think it's a very minor part, but it just adds to the package. And do go over and visit them whilst Aaron's holding court at the Puy de Lors table. Clearly, do go over and have a look at the bottles because they've got. I love the design of the labels. Yeah. Okay, wax is very and it's got wax closures, but I personally really like that. Even though I'm a very sort of traditional sort of man when I look at the wines that I love and where they come from, but I love that sort of new sort of evolution of aesthetic look as well within Burgundy. So. They are brilliant, and sometimes life catapults you into a different direction. And we've got quite a few domains that we know that's been for the greater good. And I think this will be one as well. Yeah.
When Joe says he's a traditional man, he means he mostly drinks Grand Cru Burgundies.
Yeah, almost exclusively. Yeah.
Well, declassified Grand Cru into Premier Cru is acceptable if it's young vines. But anyway, Aaron.
I will be holding court at a different table, and there is a reason for that. So a producer that I wanted to talk about is Domaine Joseph Roti in Gevrey-Chambertin. These wines are old school in sort of the very best traditional sense, in the fact that we've talked a little bit about whole bunch and how using that in fermentations just makes the wines a bit more fruitier, a bit more fruit forward. A bit more aromatic and spicy. 100% destemmed fruit, which just means that the wines take a little bit longer to age. These are sort of classic wines that you would stick in your cellar and then in a decade be rewarded when you open them. We tasted with Guido. Can you, to avoid me butchering
Pierre-Jean Roti.
Yeah, that's better than me saying Jean. I knew that someone was laughing. Yeah, exactly. So we tasted with Pierre-Jean Roti. He is sort of a quiet, reserved man who has taken over from his father, makes wines in exactly the same way as his father did because he believes that it's the best way to make these lovely, powerful, rich Gevrey-Chambertins. He uses organics and biodynamics, but he's not certified because, in his words, he likes the flexibility. So, of course, he will do the right thing. He really cares for his vines. It's it's quite interesting that there was a photographer following us around Burgundy this year, and she's taken some pictures of Pierre Jean in La Brunelle, which is the vineyard just behind the domaine, and he's sort of smiling and laughing, and it's just nice to see sort of how sort of outward he can be. But the funny part is that that Guy asked him would he come to our Burgundy tasting, and he said no, he'd never been to the UK and he didn't want to either.
I had no intention of going there.
Yeah. So his wines are stunning, and also the nice little bit is that you get to have some gougere whilst you taste.
Could Pierre Jean understand you, or did that need translating?
I can understand a little bit of French, so it went the trifecta basically. So Pierre Jean to Guido, back to me, then to Guido, then back. Yeah.
I'm just pleased the paparazzi took some time off following you around to take a picture of the winemaker.
Excellent. I see where this is going. Good. Happy birthday.
Yeah.
The wines are stunning, though. I mean, I've already mentioned La Brunelle, which is a 0.17 hectare vineyard, so no one's going to get more than one case of that. But all the way through, I mean, there's plenty of Premier Cru and Village Chevry wines like Champchenny, like La Fontenay that are stunning, and then we moved up into the Grand Crus. And each one of them just sort of kept on blowing me away. It's not to say that you should discount any of his other wines either, because the Village Marcenay and the Coteau Bourguignon as well are just great wines. If you want to, if you're getting into Burgundy and you want to see stylistic differences between a couple of producers, it's great to see sort of the power and the richness that you can get from Gevrey Chambertin. Not saying that that's inherent in that village, but then also you can compare to people who do use a whole bunch like Puy de Lors and really see sort of these stunning wines that are sort of playful and aromatic.
I also think that just more broad, obviously with Roti particularly because they're wonderful, but I think Marcenay is just something that people should be just really taking seriously these days.
Totally.
There's a few producers that we're lucky enough to do one, but I think Roti's Marcenay. I really think that if you're looking at some Gevrey Chambertin prices, sort of just generally across the board, and thinking, oh, that kind of represents the kind of top end of the budget, like to look at Marcenay as an appellation, I think is just completely right. It's something that I'll be doing. I think it's a village that's been pretty undervalued for quite a long time, and in the hands of someone serious like Joseph Roti, you're going to get a seriously classical expression of Pinot that's you'll open that in 5 to 8 years' time, Village Marcenay in a decent vintage like 2023, and be very pleased with yourself.
I think the fact that Marcenay's got a bit more clay on the soil than Gevrey as well just means that the wines are expressive that much earlier. So I think in terms of something that you don't have to wait a long time for, it's a bit of a no-brainer, I think. And,
but it brings back again to discussion points that we've said on podcasts previously, but also to our customers at tastings. With this run of great vintages that we've had, especially from sort of 15 onwards, but 18, 19, 20, 22, 23 vintages that have had the influence of the sun, looking outside of those mainstream villages, going to those appellations, whether it could be Santenay for red and Morange and Fixin, and yes, merchants have been banging those drums for a little while, but the consistency of which they're coming out now is so impressive. And coming to the tasting is a whether it's ours or someone else's, is a great way to really understand that producers have bought land out there because they can't afford it elsewhere, and these are great winemakers who understand, and they've got to know those vineyards now more intimately the longer they've had them, and they're producing some magical stuff.
Comes back to I think a really simple formula for buying your wine. Come to the tasting, find a producer you love, and follow them across all of the appellations that they produce, because you will surprise yourself. You'll the amount of times that we all, in terms of really exciting producers, you pick up, one sort of outlying village that they do, or one little small appellation that they've got somewhere else. Yeah. And you get it in the glass and you're like, this is phenomenal. And I think, Roti Marcenay is a classic example of that.
Yeah.
Top Gevrey producer, got a little satellite in Marcenay, glorious.
It's actually quite a well-trodden path. Your love. When I joined Cornies, I wasn't familiar with Roti's wines at all, and it's obviously it's mirrored within yourself. I know Neville as well, and people when you discover those wines, it's because they're really under the radar. Like you said, they don't want to come and do any sort of PR in inverted commas themselves. It's split across quite a few merchants, so therefore, there's no one particular, big merchant that has a huge allocation who is going to drive forward lots and lots of tastings and events, etc. So you don't see them that often, but when you do, you're very grateful that you've been introduced.
When we tasted as well, halfway through the tasting, a German wine merchant joined us, and he just told us that he'd been importing the wines since the 80s. And he was retiring this year, so this was his last time tasting. And it's just funny that, I'm looking back at my tasting notes now, and you're sort of scribbling everything down and trying to remember every single bit and really assessing the wine. This guy was just sat there enjoying himself, really enjoying himself.
You've been dealing with Joseph as well.
Yeah,
the smoking times.
Getting stuck in.
Smoking in the cellars, yeah. Cool. Well, okay, yeah. So that's nice. What was there any others that you wanted to?
Yeah, I think the other one which really stood out for me, and moving on to more white dominant, is Francois Carillon in Pouligny. I think Pouligny Montrachet's really done great things in 2023. The quality of the fruit, a really nice sort of Solaire feel, but without being overripe, and then there's really nice acidity, especially at Premier Cru level. We've already offered the Domaine Leflaive wines there; they were stunning. But if you want to drink Pouligny Montrachet, go for Francois Carillon. The Pouligny Village, I gave that 17.5 plus. It's sort of a blend of 5 plots, and you get this sort of generosity with also sort of really nice stone fruit elegance and a little bit of spice as well. Also in a vintage, we've talked about the vintage 2023, in a vintage where everything is good. It's also interesting sometimes when you get standouts, and the Pouligny L'Ensagne was completely mesmerizing. A couple of us, Guy, you as well. You sort of said that it was a real step up.
Yeah, I think that was where the point in the tasting came that you thought, okay, there's something really special happening here. Yeah. But we're not doing ourselves any favors by mentioning that, because it's a tiny quantity-wise. But
form an orderly queue.
Yeah,
Please edit that out.
But I still gave similar scores to the Le Perrier and Le Combat, and similarly, tasting through the Falatier and the Champgarn, you feel the producer style, and you feel the quality of the village and the vintage. Really good wines. I'll be enjoying those over the next decade. Great with seafood.
So that's one of the wines probably I'm looking forward to the most trying at the Tuesday. The tasting on Tuesday is Carillon. Yeah, because I love his wines. I want to see what he's done. I wasn't on present on that week when we did. But just going back to the Pouligny Village point, this year there's been several occasions through tastings. If you're wanting to get, a white Burgundy on the dinner table or lunch table, Sunday lunch, and that expresses its origin perfectly, has an incredibly sort of elegance and finesse around the wine itself. At the right price point. I mean, that one is where I've been pointing a lot of people, and I've been getting a lot of thank yous for it, particularly new customers who've come in and they're exploring Burgundy, and you want to give them that sort of prime example of it's almost an Alpha Pouligny in that respect. It really shows all it can offer. And the 23, I'm sure, is no different.
Yeah, I mean, just two briefly wines to mention from the Carillon stable as well, sort of at the other end of the spectrum, if you like. And one is the wine that he makes in Costières de Nîmes, down in the south of France, called La Bergerie. And it's made in Pouligny Montrachet, but it comes from the south of France. And it's a wine that was started in the 21 vintage when it was that really short crop. And he's continued it because it was such a success. And I mean, it's genuinely an absolute bargain. I mean, it's
bonkers value.
Yeah, in Bond, it's just over a tenner a bottle. I mean, it's an absolute sort of must have. And And I think in terms of sort of an introduction to the carry-on stable, that's one to definitely look out for. The only other one that I was going to mention is the CMB label. So we've bottled his Bourgogne Chardonnay, which is now a Côte d'Or Chardonnay, as a CMB own label bottling for the last 4 or 5 years, I would say. And it was the first one of these kind of partnership labels that we did as a company. And it's been a great success as well. And it's one of these limited run bottlings that when it's gone, it's gone. But we try to do this every year. And the 23 of that, again, is fabulous. So look out for both of those
The
wines.
label looks very posh as well.
It does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Aaron.
Cheers.
So we're going in the direction of around the table, actually. So I might as well jump in next. So yeah, from who's going to be there on Tuesday, who's in the release that I really loved. I'll start with the reds. Whenever we taste, we always start with the reds and then go on to the whites. So I'll sort of go for a red focused producer. Georges Glantonnay. So great news is, we're exclusive for them now. We didn't start out with the total exclusivity. We had exclusive wines from them, but now we've got the full range, and that's wonderful. And we popped into Volnay and did a remarkable tasting. Sat down with Sarah and Guillaume, and that's a brother-sister combination. And Guillaume's the winemaker. Sarah obviously helps in various guises out in the vineyard as well as in the winery as well when she needs to. But she's sort of the face of the domain as well, and does a lot of the marketing and tastings and travel. And she goes all around. And again, we're talking about younger generation. This is taking over parents' vineyards and taking it to a new direction and a new level. I love what they're doing there now because. Can't remind me, what was the first vintage? Was it
15? I think we started.
15, blimey. Okay, my guess was way off.
It may have been slightly after that, but it was.
But we've seen a really positive momentum there in terms of their style and how they come across with the wines. And when I first tasted there, which was with you a while ago in a very wintry November, I remember loving them. I loved the aromatics, but the palate sometimes didn't quite match up in certain aspects. Certain vintages it did, and now you've got this lovely sort of quite plush feel that comes through these wines within the tannin structure and the fruit, but very much loyal to where they're from. And this is based in Volnay, and a lot of their holdings are there. But for me, some of the most exciting things they're doing there is in their Pommard vintage, in their Pommard vineyards. And in 23, I've scribbled down some high praise against the Pommards wines. I particularly love their Comte de Suisse. That's probably going to be my sort of insider's pick. Their very best is Le Rouge en Haut, which is obviously an incredibly impressive piece of terroir, which we've discussed before about, and may have even mentioned on a previous podcast. So I won't go too much, but some people feel that it should be promoted to a Grand Cru status rather than just staying at Premier Cru. And you can feel that within the wine. That was my highest scoring from them at 18 to 18.5. That's not to say that their Volnay Premier Crus are not firing on cylinders. I mean, they delivered aromatics, prettiness, then some salinity, some tension in certain ones, whether it's Ronceray or not. And I really implore you to look at those wines. They do a few whites as well, which are quite remarkable. Mostly their Monteley Blanc, I think, is their best. They do a Meursault, Centenot, but Le Champfier was the one that I would actually say take your attention there. Going again, as we talked about earlier on, into an appellation, outside of the mainstream, further west in the Côte d'Or, and it's got this brilliant sort of luscious fruit that 23 offers, but this sort of calcaire style that they've managed to attain within the wine, which gives this sort of real stony, strong vibration. But then there's this lovely dry extract and richness around the wine, built around it, which is from their winemaking style. And that's the one to go for really on that.
We tasted the Bourgogne Côte d'Or,
yes,
the Rouge recently, and that was great.
Yeah,
for value for money, just for getting into a domain and understanding what they're all about with sort of silk and fruit and aromatics. They're so good.
We are offering it. It's called Maison Dieu, the House of God. But it's a great wine. It's lovely.
I think the watchword with Glantonnay for me is just all about transparency, isn't it? You sort of, their reds and their whites, they feel, there's not somebody's not really working hard to put their sort of individual winemaker stamp on it. It's all about where the stuff's made. And as I say, like Joe was talking about, with those sort of calcaire styles on the white, they want that kind of mineral transparency.
Yeah.
And then on the reds, it's just all about this sort of delicate fruit profile. And I just think they're so charming, so early. And I think the Premier Cruise and that top Pommard, those are going to be glorious. If you pop them away in the cellar. But there's so many of their wines are just beautiful from the get-go.
It's a really good point, because the Pommard, what I wanted to, and you reminded me to sort of get across, is it's because Pommard, as we know, a lot of people have been, if you've been tasting Burgundy for a while, and you can associate sort of almost rusticity and a little bit of austerity within Pommards, and it takes time and it's tight. And here you don't have that. You've got this sort of seductive side that they managed to sort of coax out through. Okay, they've been given helping hand with the vintage and the styles over the last sort of 5-6 years, to bring forward that sort of more fruit forward component. However, they also add that little element with the sweet spicing from some whole bunch of character here and there, blue flowers, etc. But at the heart of it is just that transparent fruit, that core fruit. But they have managed to really bring it forward in a delicate way. And I think that's exactly the right word as well, as delicate.
Yeah, the interesting thing on the Pommard Premier Cruise, they make two of them, Comte de Sous and Rougia, is they do whole berry fermentation. So rather than using whole clusters, they destem everything, but then they put whole intact berries into the barrels and roll the barrels. So you get this intra sort of cellular fermentation thing happening, which really brings out this brightness of fruit. It's an interesting technique. And
it was a fun tasting. I mean, we sat there and Adam was there. He joined us on that one, and I think it was his first sort of full lineup. Really enjoyed it. And Guillaume was just so expressive, and I think he really he's really grown into the role over the years, hasn't he? So and then on to my second event. I sort of more white focus. They do a small amount of red, and that's Domaine de Vilaine, A&P de Vilaine, Aubert and Pamela, which is what it sort of used to be called. Now it's straight to Domaine de Vilaine, based up in Rouy, and these are
down in Rouy.
Sorry, down in Rouy, yeah.
Depending on where you're coming from.
I'm falling on just a lazy expression. Based down in Rouy, and these are. I love offering these wines because Pierre de Benoit, who is Aubert's nephew, runs the estate for him on his behalf and has done. I've known Pierre since working at Corny and Barry, so it's lovely, obviously, to sort of go and see him and taste him and catch up. He loves a chat, and we've done a couple of fun dinners in the evening with him as well in Beaune and things where he's got a place. And he is so dedicated. His uncle's passion for terroir expression is clearly rubbed off, because the mission there is Rouy has this incredible sort of exposition and breakdown of vineyards geographically in a row, and they are made up of different subsoil structures and different lengths of topsoil as well. And what they want to do is express those different parcels as best as they can. And he's sort of, taken that baton from Aubert, certainly, and run with it. And so we offer all of the wines in a single vineyard offer, which are always a little bit behind on the 22s, which I'll come on to. But the 23s we will be offering and tasting is probably my favourite Aligoté that we possibly do in Corny Barry, the Bouzeron. I think it's a wonderful introduction into Aligoté, because it gives that zing, it gives that sort of raciness there, but they contain it within a very sort of majestic style with, again, a little bit of texture, which adds this sort of more gracious sort of play to the wine. It's incredibly fresh in 23, and I know we spoke about freshness being one of the key components of 23 in the last podcast when we talked about vintage. But in here, that freshness is the impression of it is so apparent. I mean, it got us talking with Pierre, if you remember, and he was talking about there's this sort of bitterness that comes through sometimes with Aligoté, which amplifies that freshness and the feel of it, which comes from thicker skins. And in a vintage like 23, Aligoté can develop that sort of thicker skin, and the components from that will then, ultimately result in the wine. So I think it's probably a good vintage to look at Aligotés generally. I mean, they've been going from strength to strength as a general rule across all of Burgundy and different domains, and the Bouzeron is no exception. I loved it.
Bouzeron is an interesting village. It's an aligoté only appellation, so it's one of 5, I think, villages in the Côte Chalonnaise, and it's the only one where you can only make aligoté in terms of labelling your wines Bouzeron. So Domaine de Vilaine have really been instrumental in putting the aligoté grape on the radar.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was Aubert de Vilaine sort of, really getting behind it as an interesting variety.
Absolutely. It's a good point. Yeah, that's actually where the domain used to be, didn't it? It was based down in Bouzeron, where Aubert lived, and is a separate village, as Guy's mentioned, to where the Ruiz are. But then moving on to the 22s, and before we did, actually, if anyone bought any of the Rui Premier Cru 21 last year, where they blended all of the single vineyards into one, we tasted that before we went on to the 22s, and I adored it last year, and it is still in a real knockout place.
Yeah.
But yeah, 22s, moving onwards. I loved the style. If you recall, obviously it's a vintage of solaire, warmth again, but they had these rainfalls at the perfect moments across the growing seasons in 22, which allowed that acid profile to really take a hold and sort of probably propel the vintage to one of the best white vintages out there, really, in young ones. Okay, 20 is certainly on there, and 17, but I don't think it's going to be that far behind, in my own opinion. And there they do the Margotet, Le Clou, Le Reboursé, Montpellier. So it's these, out of them all, I won't go through each individual one, but when it comes to it, the Rue Reboursé, I scored it 18.5 to 19. It was stunning. My tasting note, just having a look, the nose is steely. There's a chalkiness about it. There's a bright attack, and then this gentle richness that builds, and then the innate power comes with that, and then there's real poise and intensity on the finish, all with this lovely harmonious fresh balance as well. So I'll leave my rant over to that.
You're giving higher scores than me. This is are you trying to take on my mantle of just scoring everything 20 out of 20?
Am I trying to out-suckling you?
I wasn't going to say that.
No, I'll leave Aaron Suckling Eccles in the corner to it's awful.
I love Pierre's theory on sort of fruit components in wines, and he says that the fruit character in a wine is the memory of the fruit, and in order to get to that point, you have to kill the fruit. So he said in riper vintages like 23, it's quite hard to kill the fruit, he said.
Yeah, I like that.
He's clearly managed it. So.
And that brings us on to Neville.
Yeah. So, so many I enjoyed. To narrow it down is tricky, but I through gritted teeth, I've got to talk about Pierre Moret. Guy and I.
I was jealous I missed out.
Oh yeah, Guy and I wandered into Meursault on actually a slight reprieve from truly awful weather throughout the week. Anne Moret very kindly received us, and we had a fabulous tasting. I think it's one of the iconic domains of Meursault. Really, there's a few great names there, but I'd absolutely support throwing Pierre Moret in there. I think if I was to kind of give customers a nudge on where to go with those wines, firstly, I think you've absolutely got to look at the Bourgogne Chardonnay from them. I think at its level, to me, there's not too many out there that touch it. It's taken from periphery vineyards to Meursault on obviously the flatter land, and did disclose that a well-known critic had been through just a few days before and proclaimed that it also is possibly one of the best Bourgogne Chardonnays made. I should remain nameless. But it was fabulous. It was absolutely fabulous.
Twist Devil's arm at the tasting, I'm sure.
Yeah. For further information, do come and speak to me. But no, I love that wine. I think it's got a real mineral presence. There's really quite a surprising amount of concentration and texture that she manages to squeeze in there without the use of oak. It's light on the oak as a cuvee, but it still has this sort of real intensity, which I loved. I then think, the sort of single Ludi, single vineyard Meursault Village cuvées is just completely where it's at with Pierre Moret. Honourable mention to May Tavo, which I just thought was stunning. If you can get your there isn't actually loads of this, but if you can get your mitts on or twist your salesperson's arm to get your hands on some of the Merceau TA, that is particularly superb, and is sort of Tesson. That's situated around some of the real top Premier Crus of Merceau. Anne actually showed us on a map sort of where it sits, and it's. I mean, you look at it from an exposition point of view from the road at the bottom of Merceau, and you can see it. It's basically on the same sort of alignment as many of the famous Premier Crus. So definitely one to look out for.
It was quite nice when we tasted May Tavo with Anne. She's an interesting taster because she does sort of opine at the same time, so it's quite fun tasting with her. And she said that this is a wine to open when you need happiness, which I thought was quite nice.
That was great. Yeah. But yeah, I think the Moray wines, just the more I take, they have this tension and sensitively deployed reduction on the nose that I think is just gives really great complexity. The palate is vibrant and full of acidity, and kind of there's a mineral core to almost all of the wines that she makes. Those village, whichever one you end up going for and enjoy at the tasting, you're in safe hands.
My adoration for that domain as well. And it's definitely one of the stars of the offer, stars of the tasting. Certainly, if you're coming to the tasting, you make sure you say hello to Anne and taste those wines because they are exceptional. But it's probably a good point to jump in and say, actually, in this offer, there's 7 offers releases that we do normally as a standalone release, but actually we've put them into the main January offer this year, and Domaine Moray is one of them. And the reason we wanted to do that is just to sort of, overall just increase the brilliance of the offer, the quality of the offer, taking it to another level. There's more variety, and that's in terms of styles as well as in terms of price as well. So the Burgundy offer this year, I dare say, is probably one of our finest general offers that we've done, because there's some amazing domains in there with Pierre Moray being one of them.
Yeah, we've got 20 producers, I think it was, in the January offer this year. So it's significantly bigger than it has been in recent years, which is good.
I think highest praise for you, Nev. You took a bottle to your 30th dinner last night.
I did take a bottle of Pierre Moray to my 30th dinner last night, and fabulous it was. Pellini Montrachet Champagnes Premier Cru 2020.
Lovely.
Awesome.
Stunning wine. Absolutely stunning wine. I would also urge people to cellar those. I actually was talking to Anne during this tasting, and I was sort of boring her about what wines that I'd opened of hers sort of recently, which she indulged me with, which was very kind. But she said, she was like, please, can you just leave them a little bit longer? So I would encourage everybody who does own some Pierre Moray of the last sort of few vintages, tuck them away, because I also have been very fortunate to have some old examples from the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and when they're on, my goodness, they're good.
Yes.
So don't be afraid to age them, but if you have impatient hands like me, then don't be afraid to tuck in.
Anyone else you wanted to touch on before we wind up?
A quick honourable mention. We've not got loads of time, but I think the quick honourable mention to me, I think.
To you, happy birthday.
Yes, again, to myself. But no, I think I've got to speak about Justin Girardin in Santenay. I think Justin is producing, I think, just fabulous wines of real value above all else. I think I'm a huge fan of his red wines. I think the sort of single vineyard Santenays give you a really cool snapshot of kind of what's going on in a very exciting village. There's been a lot of chatter about Santenay as somewhere to watch, and Justin is producing very singular wines. I mean, I think for me, I love his Clos Rousseau. I think that's a wine of sort of surprising structure to me. There is charm there is purity, but this is not a sort of pop and pour wine, I wouldn't say. I think this is something that I think really will reward cellaring if you're inclined to do so.
I'd mention his Maladier as well. I think
Yes.
as a good example of Santenay Premier Cru. I think that's a good one to taste.
Yeah, it leads. Yeah, I mean, my experience with Justin, especially in those warmer vintages as well, is gorgeous. And about 5 years of bottle age on them is when you want to sort of just jump in, because that fruit from the warmer vintages, it sort of slightly lowers its obvious presence, and then you get that sort of the Santenay character, which is, there's so much chalk within that village, and the vineyards resonate through it. So. But yeah, I love them, and I think actually at one point we were discussing. I think it was probably would have been 2021 when the 18s were out, and it was one of the most purchased red wines by staff members in across the course of 6 months.
Well, the pricing makes
great pricing,
very good sense. He makes a Pommard as well, which should be mentioned, and Pommard Les Vigneaux, which again is an example of this kind of new generation of Pommard winemaking, which is supple and delectable, and will drink relatively early. So great wines.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, I think we'll probably draw a line under there. I mean, like we said, there's 20 domains in the offer, 7 of them that we've brought in, Roti being another one that's coming into the offer as well. So we could really wax lyrical about the majority of them that are coming in. So we hope to see as many at the tasting as possible. Nev will be Aaran will be at the Prix de l'Ours table. Nev, you'll be at Moray by the sounds of it.
I will.
I'll be propping up Glantonnay,
and I'll be there all over the place, and then going up to Scotland the next day. So we're doing our Edinburgh tasting next Wednesday. So 2 days of Burgundy tastings.
Floating all over the country.
What a treat!
I'm looking forward to the dinner afterwards. I mean, I'll end on this. We last dinner, which I mentioned, which we talked to Paul about from Couvon earlier. I had the joy of Edouard Labbé sitting next to me at the dinner, and we were just munching away on our beef bourguignon, and the topic of bucket lists came up, and he said, what have you got on your bucket list? And he said, you want to know what's on mine? And I was like, yeah, go on, Ed, crack away. And he said, I'd really love to go. I'm not going to attempt the French Anglo accent to offend anyone, but I'd really like to go to the Ali Pali in the Darts Champions, which was met with sheer joy from me, because that's very high on my list. I've never done it, and we just made a little promise and pact there that, okay, well, why don't we do it this year? And if you're at the tasting, come grab either one of us. We'll show you some pictures. We had an absolutely belting time, chanting along to Michael Smith, and he loved it. And consequently, it's sort of maybe started a little bit of a trend, because seeing the photographic evidence on socials, another domain's got in touch and wants to get involved. So
I believe you had a turkey hat on. So that's correct.
I did have a turkey. The animal, not of the shape of the country.
Yeah.
And a turkey hat can also be hair plugs in some slang. It's not the
Steady on.
easy. I'm not going there, Aaron.
You
Calm
already looked
down.
at me. Come on.
But yeah. So I'm looking forward to the dinner afterwards as well, because who knows what will come from that. But look, we'll end on there. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back with several other podcasts. And this is goodbye from me, Joe.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Thank you.